The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
A new Gallup poll shows that 47% of Americans would consider voting for a socialist candidate for president. So when we break this down by party lines, a socialist candidate would earn the consideration of 59% of Democrats, 49% of independents, and 26% of Republicans. No real surprise there. What is interesting is that socialism polled the lowest of all of the other backgrounds referenced in the poll. And this includes atheism. This includes Muslim candidates, which were second and third lowest among the American population at 58 and 60% respectively. So socialism polling essentially the lowest of all of the options given in this Gallup poll. And the poll comes less than 2 months after Bernie Sanders announced that he is running for president. And there's so much confusion here, Lewis, because many people believe that Bernie Sanders is a socialist, when the reality is that he's an advocate of democratic socialism, right? Socialism, period, is a social and economic system which involves social ownership of the means of production and cooperative management of the economy, as well as a political theory and movement that aims to establish such a system. Bernie Sanders is not advocating for the elimination of private business and industry in lieu of to be replaced by public shared ownership of industry. If 47% of people would consider voting for a socialist, there should be no problem whatsoever with Bernie Sanders, who is advocating a more socialistic version of capitalism than that which the vulture capitalists might prefer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're seeing this turn into not such a dirty word anymore, which is good news. If you are going to advocate for socialist policies, you have to be prepared to be called a socialist. But I guess there's still some confusion there.
Well, and this gets us to what maybe is the real issue, because 47% saying they would consider voting for a socialist means that there's 53% who would not consider voting for a socialist candidate. Yet those individuals, as we know from actual data, would agree with Bernie Sanders on his actual positions, remembering, of course, that there is a difference between Bernie Sanders' democratic socialism within a capitalist society and socialism writ large. 52% of Americans support a redistribution of wealth through heavily taxing the rich, for example. This is something that is at its highest level of support now since Gallup has been asking about that. 63% of Americans believe that the current distribution of wealth in the U.S. is unfair. So I don't know, when I look at this data, if it's good news that we're up to 47% that would consider voting for a socialist, or if it's bad news because it's so low compared to every other group mentioned, in spite of the fact that there are probably way more Americans, definitely way more Americans, that would agree with so-called democratic socialist policies versus those who would agree with, for example, the teachings of Islam, which had a higher support level in terms of the candidates in this poll.
I think this has to be a good thing. What number would that 47% have been 20 years ago? So I think probably a good thing, a step in the right direction.
That indicator going up is not a bad thing. The problem is the disconnect between that number and an understanding of what the policies are that democratic socialism and people like Bernie Sanders would push. That's where I think the ignorance is a real problem.
Well, we're going to count on people not really understanding things like that. So that's going to happen no matter what. But if we have, words like this destigmatized, I think it's a good thing.
Let's talk about Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, I told you last week, was closing in on Hillary Clinton in the state of New Hampshire. And we said, well, one poll in one state, it could just be a fluke. It might be because New Hampshire is right next to Bernie Sanders' home state of Vermont. But now we have data from Iowa, where Hillary Clinton does lead Bernie Sanders 50-24, leading in New Hampshire now 56-24. But that is a 6 to 8 point increase for Bernie Sanders in those states since the last poll from Bloomberg Politics and Partners in May, just last month. So nearly identical support in Iowa and New Hampshire. Bernie Sanders' rise cannot simply be attributed to New Hampshire being close to Vermont, nor can we say it is only a one state fluke, because we now have two states, one of which is nowhere near Vermont.
So something is working. They're doing something right. What is it? To what can we attribute this gain on Hillary?
Well, one possibility is that as the Hillary Clinton campaign ramps up, the negative media around Hillary ramps up, because there is a big contingent of people, including those on the right around Benghazi and other issues, that don't like Hillary Clinton and are sort of proactively campaigning against her. Another possibility is that this is a name recognition thing, and that Hillary Clinton's numbers earlier on were representative of people not really knowing who Bernie Sanders was. And it's possible that merely being aware that there's this guy, Bernie Sanders, and here are his views, could be helping him. That's also a possibility. Hillary Clinton's support dropping by 7 points in Iowa and 6 in New Hampshire. There is no doubt that there is a huge hill to climb here for Bernie Sanders, but the numbers are positive. But what I thought would be interesting to do, Lewis, is to go back to this point in the 2008 primaries, which would be June of 2007, is like the equivalent point in those primaries. And we know that then Barack Obama came from behind to upset Hillary Clinton. There were 4 Iowa polls conducted in June of 2007, which gets us sort of an equivalent timing to where we are right now. Hillary Clinton in those 4 polls was up 4, up 7, up 19, and down 1 in 4 different polls at this exact time. On average, it was far closer for President Obama in June of 2007 than it is for Bernie Sanders now.
That's true. But who was Barack Obama? You know, it was just some guy who we weren't that aware of, named Barack Obama, Barack Hussein Obama of all things, who beat Hillary Clinton then. And now, I don't know, maybe this guy, Bernie Sanders, who not everyone has heard of, might do the same thing.
There's one other concern I have around this, which is there were more specific questions asked comparing Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders on particular issues. And on the question of who will more forcefully take on Wall Street and financial elites, in New Hampshire, where Bernie Sanders is polling the strongest in the country, he only bested Hillary Clinton 44-37 on that question by 7 points. That is brutal, Lewis, because look at Hillary Clinton and then look at Bernie Sanders, and to say the state where he's doing the best in, there's only 7% of the population that thinks he would be tougher on Wall Street and big banks than Hillary Clinton. That's a fantasy world. I mean, Bernie Sanders is the candidate who would be toughest, and Hillary Clinton, as we know, so wrapped up in Wall Street. So that, I think, is an underlying indicator that is very disturbing.
That's kind of scary. And right next to his home state, too. It's, yeah, that's disturbing. But anyway, still, well, we've got some good news here overall.
Okay, we've talked about different right-wing politicians and pundits that seem to be just in total denial about the shooting in Charleston, South Carolina at the Emmanuel AME Church. We know that that shooting was about racial hatred, despite the statements of so many right-wingers. We have witnesses. We have the shooter's own manifesto that said he was looking to kill black people, saying to someone in the church that you people are raping white women, etc., associated with this Council of Conservative Citizens, a flat-out right-wing white supremacist group. And one example that I told you about earlier this week was Fox News contributor Alveda King, a conservative activist with the group Priests for Life, who appeared on Fox and Friends, and she suggested that the shooting was not about race, but that it may have been about abortion rights, saying, hey, you kill babies in the womb, kill people in their beds, shoot people on the streets, so now you go into the church when people are praying. And we've talked about this way in which Fox News and other right-wing media will cherry pick and use black people to say offensive things. In this case, since the victims were black, it's a very crafted strategy that right-wingers love. Ben Dixon from the Benjamin Dixon Show did a great commentary on this, and we're going to be posting it to our YouTube channel over the weekend. And now we have another example. This one is not abortion. This one is gay activist terrorism. This is Alan Keyes, who went on Newsmax and was speaking to the host there, Steve Maltzberg. And he said, listen, I don't think that we're talking about a racially motivated shooting, but you know what? Maybe it's that the shooter was going in to intimidate and do gay terrorism. This might have been so-called gay rights terrorism on the part of Dylann Roof. Of course, there's no evidence to support that whatsoever, but I'll play for you what Alan Keyes had to say.
So you believe that this whole episode, the shooting, was motivated more by the fact that it was a church and there were Christians in there than by the race of those people who were in there?
Well, it's a question you have to ask, because here you had an individual who could have focused on any number of targets that involve black folks in South Carolina. There's not exactly a dearth of black people in the state, nor of symbols of things that are associated with the black past and the black heritage. To single out the church, which is the institution that exemplifies the very faith that leads many black folks, for instance, to line up against the destruction of traditional marriage, which Obama and others are now pushing for, that will put them in a position of choosing between God and man, and many will resist, many will stand with God. I think that an act which tends to intimidate them, make them feel afraid of standing forward in their faith, I think we ought to be scratching our heads and wondering whether there is an evil at work that's more directed at God and Christianity than it is in existence, so that politicians can play games with race.
So the idea is that since a church was the location, and churches are sort of stereotypically lumped in as anti-gay, if a guy goes in and shoots up a church, he might be shooting up the church because he's pro-gay rights and the church is anti-gay rights. Have you ever heard a more fact-free hypothesis around this shooting, Lewis? This, for me, takes the cake.
I don't see how constructive it is to just say, okay, let's throw out all the facts about this entire shooting, and I'm going to come up with a new theory for you.
Right.
I think that he's actually an alien from another planet that is trying to take over ours, and we need to consider this. Just ignore everything else.
It is that type of thing where it's saying, hey, let's put aside all of the stuff we know and say it might have been X, Y, or Z. We have a manifesto which shows the influence that Dylann Roof received from extremist right-wing white supremacist groups. He said that he was deliberately targeting black people, and Alan Keyes said it might have been about gay rights. I mean, it's flat out offensive to anyone who has any connection to this incident whatsoever. The reason the focus is on race is because the shooter said that that was a factor, and the shooter was influenced by white Christian groups. We know all of this stuff.
This is just dangerous, too, because he could be influencing someone who hasn't been paying close attention to the details of the shooting. They turn on the TV, they see him, and they think, whoa, this is gay terrorism, or whatever you want to call it. It is not helping.
It's disgustingly irresponsible, and it's no surprise coming from Alan Keyes, who has a long history of saying disgusting, irresponsible stuff, so no shock there. Tweet me about this, twitter.com/dpacman. Back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to The David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show only exists because of support from our members through the membership program at davidpakman.com/membership. Today's new member of the day is Mark Dimmitt. Mark, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. Check out all of the member benefits, including some samples, including of the bonus show, at davidpakman.com/membership, where you can join Mark Dimmitt, member of the day. I have a recommendation for you today. It's a documentary. Lewis actually told me about this one. It's called Antarctica, A Year on Ice. And it's a New Zealand filmmaker named Anthony Powell who did this film. It's set in Antarctica, as the name suggests, and it's in the Ross Island region, where there are two research bases, a US base and a New Zealand base. And it chronicles a full year on Antarctica. And the big thing is most people in Antarctica, I think it's like 90% or even 95%, Lewis, I mean, it's very high, are only there during the summer. And during the Antarctic winter, it's basically a 5%, just a small percentage of the population stays there. It's 24 hours of darkness during parts of that winter. And it is just a stunning movie, both in terms of the visuals, but also the story that it tells.
Yeah, this is a great combination of someone who is a talented cinematographer, knows how to tell a good story, and just life in a place like this. It's incredible, and I don't think I'm cut out for it.
Yeah, as I was watching it, that we talked recently on the bonus show about our preference for rural versus urban versus suburban sort of areas, and we've talked about this in audience questions as well in different stories that have come up. And I just, I'm so curious about what it would be like to land on one of those Air Force planes in the middle of nowhere there, but then I would want to be there a few hours and then leave. I think that would be it for me.
I think I could do a short summer in the Antarctic, but you got to see this documentary. I mean, it is just brutal what they have to endure during the winter.
So again, we're talking about the documentary Antarctica, A Year on Ice. You can go to davidpakman.com/recommendations to see all of our recommendations, books, documentaries, all sorts of stuff. And if you use any of the links at davidpakman.com/recommendations to either buy books or stream films or whatever, the David Pakman Show gets a little kickback from you. So that is always much appreciated. Okay, yesterday I announced we were a few $100s behind from the previous day on our fundraiser. We did raise about another $1,000 overnight, which means we are still about the same amount behind. The end of day goal for today is $26,000, meaning that we are $1,450 away from the end of day goal, but we are only $450 from the halfway mark. And I still maintain, Lewis, that psychological mark is very important in a fundraiser, because once we get to 50%, we're on the home stretch. We've already raised more than half the money. Now we are just closing in on that goal. So if you're thinking of making a contribution, we have so many perks available. If you don't want a perk, no problem at all. Make a contribution in whatever amount you want. And 26,000, the goal for midnight tonight.
Sounds good. The number of donors has surged, and I'm thrilled to see that. I'm very optimistic.
No question about it. And I will remind you that if you also want to get a half-price yearly membership to the show, which will get you the bonus show and the commercial-free TV show and the podcast feed, all of that members-only stuff. If you make a contribution in any amount to the Indiegogo campaign, the next day you will get an email from us with a code to get a half-price yearly membership. If it's been more than a day since you made your contribution and you haven't received that email, check your spam folder or just get in touch and let us know, and we will make sure to get you that code. Half-price memberships for all donors. Donate any amount at davidpakman.com/donate. $1,450 is where we are right now in terms of the end of day goal. Huge story, kind of a mini scandal erupting from Whole Foods supermarkets, which have apparently been routinely overcharging customers by overstating the weight of prepackaged meat, dairy, and baked goods, according to New York City's consumer chief yesterday. The price on a package of coconut shrimp at Whole Foods Market was too high by $14.84, according to the Department of Consumer Affairs Commissioner Julie Menin. A package of chicken tenders overpriced by $4.85, and a vegetable platter overpriced by $6.15, according to the department. The department says the findings suggest a lot of these individual packages might not be weighed at all, because in some cases you had packages of products labeled with the exact same weight when that would be, quote, practically impossible. It is true. How do you get the exact same amount of vegetables in two different packages? You would think it would vary at least slightly. The Consumer Affairs Department tested 80 different types of prepackaged products and found mislabeled weights for every single one, with overcharges ranging from 80 cents to that $14.84 markup I mentioned on the shrimp. This is very troubling.
This is strange. Now, I've worked in supermarkets before, and there are many different people operating these stores. So you could have someone who is in charge of that packaged food section, perhaps, who is intentionally doing this to make them look really good because they're making X number of dollars a month, a quarter, and it looks like they're doing a great job. Or it could be bigger than that. I don't know.
The commissioner said, quote, "We have been meeting with Whole Foods for months, but we repeatedly found problems that were incredibly pervasive." Whole Foods said, "We disagree with the Department of Consumer Affairs' overreaching allegations." And they say that they have made, Whole Foods alleges that the Department of Consumer Affairs has made grossly excessive monetary demands to settle this. No penalties have yet been assessed because the investigation is ongoing. Last year, Whole Foods did agree to pay $800,000 in penalties and to improve pricing accuracy after an investigation into alleged irregularities at their California stores. I'm all for allowing grocery stores to set the price to absolutely whatever they want. You want to charge $100 a pound for shrimp peeled and deveined raw? Go right ahead, right? The problem is, don't lie about the weight, don't lie about the volume, just raise your prices. Rip people off in a completely honest and straightforward way. That is my dream, Louis.
That's your dream, and it's reasonable. I think I'm surrounded by Whole Foods here. The only time I go in is when I'm hungry and I'm near one and I just want to grab something quick from the buffet. I think people who go there generally are willing to pay whatever they want or pay anything for the things they want. That seems to be what happens at Whole Foods. So yes, you're right. Just charge what you want to charge, and maybe people will pay it.
In New York City, for a while, I was going to the Union Square Whole Foods, actually, until one opened up much closer to me in Brooklyn. And my routine was I would go to Trader Joe's. There's so much stuff that it's exactly the same at Trader Joe's and Whole Foods. For example, you might pick up some ravioli, and you look at the ingredients. The ingredients are the same. There doesn't seem to be any difference in terms of the quality, but it's 4 times the price at Whole Foods, $9 or $10 for a package of ravioli, as opposed to $3 at Trader Joe's. So canned black beans, all of that stuff I would get at Trader Joe's. But Trader Joe's produce, at least in New York City, is not really that good. Trader Joe's also doesn't sell, unless you want like frozen fish, they don't sell fish, etc. So then I would go to the Whole Foods typically for produce, certain produce, and for meat, chicken. They have a really good deli there, fish, that type of thing. And I found that by doing that, as opposed to just going to Whole Foods, I was saving about 40% every single week. I mean, it was not an insignificant price difference.
Yeah, and like I said before, I've significantly cut down on the amount of meat I eat, and I don't really even keep any at home. Occasionally some frozen fish, so I can do the majority of my shopping at places like Trader Joe's, and it's very efficient, cost effective.
I'm kind of worried about when the show moves to Boston, because I've already been looking into, there's a brand new Whole Foods that's going to be about 3 blocks from where I'm going to be living. It's the most glorious Whole Foods I've ever seen. I mean, they have a spa inside. Not that I would go to the spa, but just to give you a sense, they have an entire wine area. They have an entire bar where you can sit down and grab a beer. I mean, the place is absolutely stunning. And the Trader Joe's that's closest is not really very convenient. So I don't know what's going to happen yet, but I'm going to need to develop a plan that does not involve doing all my grocery shopping at Whole Foods.
Yeah, you're going to need a plan. You'll figure it out. You really have no choice. Maybe you could have drones deliver your food.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. All right, remember the Indiegogo campaign is on davidpakman.com/donate. We will take a break. Really important topic next on the after effects of war. We will speak to Nancy Sherman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Nancy Sherman, who's author of AFTERWAR, Healing the Moral Wounds of Our Soldiers. She's university professor of philosophy at Georgetown University and also has research training in psychoanalysis and is a recent Guggenheim fellow. Nancy, the book is so interesting, and we've been talking about the impact of war on our troops, on countries, at so many different levels. And I was interested that in the title of your book, you actually say the moral wounds. Tell us first what you mean by that.
Well, so we all at this point know about post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, as a psychological injury. And we've been dealing with that forever and a day, but labeled as that since the Vietnam War. We haven't really fully grappled with all the moral implications that are part of psychological injuries. PTSD is really narrowly construed, at least, maybe not always in the popular mind, as a response to fear. It's life threat and how you get unhinged by that kind of life threat. But in those kinds of disaster situations or situations of great threat, or given the morass of war, the moral morass of war, you also sort of are constantly questioning, is that the right war? Why did I have the bad luck of being in this war rather than that? That always came up with Afghanistan versus Iraq, or Iraq versus Afghanistan, or it's not World War II. I left my buddies behind, but I'm surviving, so a form of survivor guilt. Or I didn't have the right resources, I'm waging war, but I'm supposed to help the civilian family, or build sewers, but I never was trained to do it, and I'm not given enough money. I'm dealing with a terrorized population. How am I supposed to help them if they have PTS? All of that is the moral mess of war, and we underestimate how a conscientious soldier or service member struggles with that dimension of war.
And with regard to how our military and our government is equipped to deal with soldiers re-entering civilian life, give us a sense of what are the primary issues that you see with that preparedness?
Well, a lot of it is that we have walls. We are siloed. This is a country without conscription, not that I'm arguing for it, but it does mean that only 0.5% have served for close to 15 years now. And these wars are warming up again, not with the same amount of ground troop capacity, but still special forces are going to be there, as well as other folks in the in intelligence. And very few of us really have intimate connections with those who've served. So, and service members feel that. They feel alienated. They don't really feel like they're coming home in a way that it's home. And so, and we civilians often are prepared at an airport to say thank you for your service, but we don't really know where to go beyond that. So that's one aspect of it. There are lots of service NGO or non-governmental organizations out there that are helping out, but it's not highly organized, and the VA is overtaxed, as is the DoD in getting services out to members. So I'd say we're still a very divided country with a huge civilian military gap.
And we've talked in the past with others about the stigma around mental health and the procurement of mental health services. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that, because as I see it, and I may be wrong or I may even just be understating it, there's this sort of social stigma associated with seeking mental health services. But in addition to that, there's also within the military, as a matter of policy, there are reasons why service members may not want it to be known or may not want to seek those services, because it could impact their sort of eligibility or the way their superiors see them, could it not?
Absolutely. There's the term is a career killer. If it's known and you seek, that has been the issue in the past. There's been huge strides, or shall we say efforts, in the past 10 or 15 years from top command. Peter Corelli, who was vice chief of the Army, had a suicide review board, and he's been working on destigmatizing psychological injury, seeking treatment for psychological injury. Massive efforts within the military as a result of these wars, which have hurt minds even more than bodies, to overcome the stigma, but and to not make it a career killer by having resilience programs online and the like. But that said, it's still the case that very few generals, for example, are declaring that they have post-traumatic stress, but they do suffer. If they would send out a message loud and clear, their subordinates would feel protected. And in general, I'd say that's the military. But it is nested, as you say, within a larger problem. This country needs to undo the stigma of mental health at a public epidemiological level. And until we do that, the military as a subset of the public is going to suffer as well.
You've interviewed, countless returning service members, and certainly some of those service members killed others while serving. And I'm curious whether you have come across service members that seemed either unaffected or content or happy or otherwise not negatively impacted by having done that. And if so, could that ever be a sort of normal reaction, a healthy reaction?
Well, killing in war is so complex, and those of us that are theoreticians can barely understand all the parameters and perimeters of constraint. It's a lively topic. Soldiers often, G.I. Joe doesn't go through just war theory in the way we philosophers do. That said, almost every person I've interviewed over 20 years, 25 years of talking to folks in the military has had some upset at killing. It's hard to get used to it. You might say, that say the first kill is hard, the second kill easier. But typically my experience is not just the killing, but it's killing in complicated circumstances, collateral incidents, incidents where you come to know the identity of the person very well. And I should say remote killings are of course, very, very hard. We are beginning to appreciate what it's like to track people afterwards, by video, so that you could keep collecting intelligence. Drone pilots have a lot of moral burden on their plate, on their mind. So I'd say, sure, if you get callous to killing, there's some problem, but you need a certain level of protection in order to do the job. And the military's job should be, that is training and doctrine, TRADOC it's called in the Army, should do a much better job in actual psychological and moral discussion of what it's like to face killing.
And is enough of this happening before service members enter the theater of war?
No. I just had a conversation with a young Marine captain who was telling me that because of cuts in training, he didn't even get the idea of live tissue training, which is part of training. You actually have a pig's head or something like that. It is as if you're in an ER and you're looking at a lot of guts and gore in order to deal with what you might encounter on the battlefield. That's the physical side of dealing with the blood of war. There's a whole psychological and moral side, and that often isn't done. There's just short training on lots of things, and often PowerPoint presentations aren't the best way to go. So there's always a challenge to how to train. I know that right now, General Odierno is being briefed. I briefed his staff on ways of training resilience, because and being smart about the emotions that a warrior needs, because we're a smaller force that are going to face very, very challenging population-centric kinds of engagements. And so they're being very smart about how they proceed, but it doesn't always mean that they know how to distill it down to the foot soldier.
The last thing I want to touch on, and you alluded to it a little bit, is that of drone warfare and sort of war that is physically disconnected from the battlefield with regard to the service members. Based on what you've studied so far, is there any reason to think that the propensity for trauma or developing PTSD would be any different for drone pilots than it is for those on the battlefield, or would it be the same?
Well, I'm not an empirical psychologist, so I haven't looked at all the data, but what I have read suggests, and I've talked at length to a drone pilot himself, there's a lot of exposure that's similar, even though it's mediated through a screen. And it's certainly very prolonged. As I say, you sort of do a lot of getting to know the environment and the people involved. And so in a sense, you are tracking someone psychologically in a much more engaged and intensive way than you would be if you're a sniper. where you let off a round of ammunition and you move on. These people don't move on. They sit in the environment, collecting intel for aftermath assessments and the like. And it's a little bit like we underestimate what interrogators have to do. They have to spend a lot of time with videos of beheadings in order to see who they're after, what they're up to, what the deeds are, so they can use some of that information. Same kind of thing. And that is taking its toll. We know that the Air Force is having a lot of issues with post-traumatic stress, and their numbers of people that want to do drone piloting is down. There's also the stigma within the service, of course. Are you a real pilot? I'm not sure. Should you be up there in rank as someone who really flies? And so they're dealing with the social stratification issues as well.
Very, very important topic. I'll remind you, we've been speaking with Nancy Sherman. The book is AFTERWAR, Healing the Moral Wounds of Our Soldiers. Thank you so much for being on with us.
Thank you very much, David. Appreciate it.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Solar prices are dropping, and very, very quickly. Back in 2010, 5 years ago, the United States Department of Energy came up with a goal for reaching an installed price of $1 per watt of solar energy, which would make it very competitive with the electricity that is generated from fossil fuels. And the goal was to reduce the cost of large-scale solar systems from projections of around $3.50 per watt in 2010 to the $1 mark by 2010. This is a reduction in cost of about 71% in 10 years. Seemed kind of like a stretch 5 years ago, but one of the industry leaders, First Solar, is now saying it will hit $1 per watt in 2017, which will be 3 years ahead of schedule. First Solar is an interesting company, to say the least. And they've announced a new solar project in Dubai, which is going to get 5.84 cents per kilowatt hour for electricity, which stunningly, Lewis, is very competitive with fossil fuels. And it's actually half what the average person pays in the United States for electricity.
Yeah, this is sounding great. And if we could just, improve the efficiency of the actual technology, we are definitely headed in the right direction. And I hope that these are on every home and business in, I don't know, how many years, 10?
Well, that's the thing. As a homeowner, I'm always wondering if I should buy solar panels sooner or wait another few years for when they're cheaper and more efficient. And I've kind of been having this debate for many, many years, and I know other people who have as well. And there's a name for this sort of logic problem. It's called the weight calculation. And a really good analogy or explanation of it is with space exploration. If we leave now to explore space with current technology, we would be passed by people later with better technology. But then at any point, if those people leave with the technology they have, they could maybe very accurately say, well, we're just going to be passed by the next people with the better technology. So you end up never leaving, right? In the same way that you end up never actually buying the solar panels. The difference, though, is that an individual consumer can benefit from waiting, whereas a government is usually one of the players where with space exploration, there aren't that many players in space exploration, and there's a more linear line of development. So you could, even though I think it illustrates the issue around solar panels, there's different incentives in mind, I think.
Yeah, and you never know when it comes to solar energy when there could just be a huge breakthrough. You could spend thousands of dollars on solar panels tomorrow, and, a year from now, there is something revolutionary that just completely changes the game. But, I don't think it's a bad time to buy. You've got your government subsidies and it's not outrageously expensive. Yeah, why not?
And some people will say, well, just go through one of the companies where they install the solar panels for you. I've looked at a lot of those. They generally are not advantageous. Look at how it encumbers your house if you want to sell it. You're usually signing a 20-year contract. They are not bound to install newer technology if and when it becomes available. So in 10 years, you might have antiquated technology. There's a lot of issues around the companies that will install this stuff for free and then charge you for the electricity. I think that the payback period is what is really going to determine when people start installing solar panels more frequently. Right now, the payback period on the savings is typically around 8 years. I think if the payback period is reduced to around 4 years, you're going to see a huge boom in the number of people installing solar panels.
Agreed. Yeah, I'd like to hit that mark. And yeah, it's great technology.
So NASA has finally found a good use for nuclear weapons. We often wonder, what exactly are these weapons good for other than intimidating other countries and creating a sort of nuclear arms race that is very, very bad for everybody involved? We have finally found something they could be used for. Back in 2013, there was a 60-foot wide meteor which exploded over Russia. No one saw it coming. And it was actually relatively small by interplanetary standards, but it still injured 1,500 people and damaged about 7,000 buildings. And in hoping to avert future calamities like this, NASA has sealed a deal with the National Nuclear Security Administration that is responsible for enhancing national security through nuclear science. And they've been researching how to use nuclear weapons to deflect comets, asteroids, and meteors. And this new partnership that now is going on might make it easier for rocket specialists and nuclear specialists to work together and figure out how to characterize potential threats and find ways to deflect them on relatively short notice. This is some pretty futuristic sci-fi stuff.
It is. I worry a little bit about this, about possibly radioactive pieces of rock, and debris floating back down to us. But they know more about this than I do. I assume they know what they're doing. I assume this could be done safely. And why not? It seems like something that inevitably we might need to do.
Well, you're onto something, because this project is interested in medium-sized asteroids, somewhere between, and comets, between 164 and 492 feet in diameter. The large, like dinosaur killer asteroids are pretty well mapped. And we know that they don't pose a threat to Earth for the foreseeable future. We can track their trajectories. Small ones don't cause catastrophic damage and can just burn up in the atmosphere when they approach Earth. So computer simulations are suggesting that we could successfully blow up the medium-sized space rocks. But as Lewis says, the resulting fragments could make the situation worse depending on how far from Earth the asteroid is when it explodes. So that's why the more nuanced idea is use bombs to redirect asteroids rather than to sort of blow them up into a bunch of small pieces. And we'll see which way it goes. I'm actually reading a great book right now, which tackles something sort of along these lines. It's Neil Stephenson's new sci-fi book, Seven Eves. And it's just fantastic, Lewis. And it's incredible that I'm reading about something like this in a sci-fi book, yet we have now NASA actively working on this in the real world.
Yeah, it's something I've read about as well, and it's fascinating. I hope we never have to do this.
Let's go to voicemail. Our voicemail number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Call anytime. Our old friend Troy York called in. Not surprisingly, he's not happy with us. Let's take a listen.
Yeah, Backman, this is Troy York. Once again, your talk on the rebel flag is ridiculous. You're never going to ban the flag. You're just going to make it more famous. That's why the flag was always the rebel flag. Confederate flag was at many protests in Eastern Europe in the 80s and 90s against communism. It is a symbol of rebellion internationally, not just the American South.
Okay, listen. First of all, no one's talking about banning the Confederate flag. I feel like I talk, and it's like talking to a wall sometimes, because I said very clearly, Lewis, anybody who wants to can sell Confederate flag stuff or not. I think I might have misspoken and said American flag before. If you want to sell the Confederate flag, go ahead. If you want to manufacture the Confederate flag, go ahead. I don't advocate banning it. What I'm saying is it's very clear that it's a bad business decision for lots of retailers to be selling Confederate flag stuff. So I don't think it's getting more popular. I think it's very clearly getting less popular, and it is increasingly retrograde. And listen, it's fine to say that it also can stand for rebellion and whatever. In the same way that somebody could say a Nazi swastika for them just represents their ancestors who served in the German army during World War II, that doesn't take away from all of the other things that it stands for. So no, I am not into banning the Confederate flag. It's just increasingly unpopular and a bad business decision to be selling it. On today's bonus show, the Boston bomber apologizes. China seizes 40-year-old meat. Would Lewis eat 40-year-old meat? We will find out about that. The upcoming Pluto flyby, and a fascinating Design of the Year winner. All of those stories and more on the bonus show, which you can access by becoming a member at davidpakman.com/membership.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.